Here we're going to discuss the definition of a very simple term, namely zeros of a function. So what is a zero? A zero is an input value that outputs 0. Typically, in a function, the input is x and the output is y, but it doesn't have to be. So we'll see an example of that. But generally what it means is y is 0, the output is 0, what is x? Okay, so that's what we've got. Let's look at this in a couple different ways now. Okay, so here I've drawn a function, and I want to know the zeros of this function. The function in this case is capital H, notice, and the independent variable is t, the input variable is t. So our input's t, our output is h. So when I ask for the zeros, I know that h should be 0, and I want to know the t values where that h is 0. Well, in a graph, if the output is supposed to be 0, you have to be on the horizontal axis, right? Because there is no vertical distance. You don't go up or down, you're at 0, so you're on the axis. Well, that happens precisely at this point, and this point. So those three, notice those are t values, right? They're on the t-axis. Those three t values are my zeros. So here, t is negative 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We're assuming that every tick mark here represents 1. Here, t is 3. And here, t is 4, 5, 6, 7, and a little more than maybe 7.5, so something like approximately 7.6. I did this one just to illustrate that your zeros don't have to be nice whole numbers like negative 6 and 3. They can land in between the tick marks. So those are the zeros. They are input values where the output is 0. Now I want to draw a correlation here between zeros and intercepts. Namely here, the t-intercepts. You know, they're usually x-intercepts, but this is not the x-axis now, it's the t-axis. The t-intercepts here are the points, right? These are points where the function crosses the t-axis. Well, those intercepts are these 3 points. So negative 6, 0, 3, 0, and 7.6, 0. So intercepts and zeros are not exactly the same. Intercepts are points. Zeros are values or numbers, okay? Zeros are inputs, which are numbers. Intercepts are points, which are ordered pairs. So I just want to draw that correlation there so you don't get confused. They are very similar though, right? You can see that the intercepts use the same numbers as the zero. Now I'm representing a function with its equation, and I want to find the zeros this way. So again, in this case, the input is x, the output is f of x, or we could also refer to this as y. Very common to do that. So in other words, if I want to find the zeros, I'm saying that y, or f of x, equals 0. What is x, right? What are the x values that make that y 0? So what I'm going to do is I need to replace f of x with 0 in this equation. So we get 0 equals x squared minus 4x plus 21 over x squared plus 5. And now I need to figure out what x is. So that means solve this equation for x. Now the purpose of this video is not to discuss how to solve this equation. This equation could be anything, right? Any function. This happens to be a rational function, which results in a rational equation. Rational meaning fraction. So there's particular techniques you could use to solve this equation. But if this was a square root, you would use a different technique. So I'm not going into how to solve this equation. That's something that you may want to find elsewhere, depending on what you need when you get to this point. Okay, but if you do solve this equation, just in case you're trying at home and you want to know the answer, you should get that I'm sorry, I just noticed as I went to solve this equation that I copied the 21 wrong. It should be a minus 21, right? So I'm sorry if that was driving you crazy while I was talking. Negative 3 or positive 7. Those are the zeros. Negative 3, positive 7. Notice that they're x values, x equals. So they are input values. And if you were to plug those x values back into the equation everywhere there's an x, the function f of x or y should equal 0. So you should check that out. Okay, so these are the zeros. You could get the x-intercepts on the graph from this very easily. Very similar principle. You would just have ordered pairs, not numbers. But that's what zeros are using a graph or the equation of the function.